How's everybody doing? I hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm finally getting around to recording the video for the third question of the Summa. So, this is going to be sort of my overview of question three. And if you're wondering out there whether you're supposed to have access to this, yes, you are. This for this section of the Summa, I'm deciding to do a little bit of a different format. Just trying to see on a few different courses which ones are going to work the best for you guys, and then also for those who don't want to buy a course, but they kind of want to still get some of the material. So what I've kind of decided on is I'm going to be doing a video which overviews the doctrine, some of the devotional aspects of the doctrine, and then the teaching of the church, and then outlining the Summa article just a bit, giving a division of the text of sorts. So this is supposed to kind of be an introduction to reading the article on your own, and then for those who purchase the course, there's going to be all of my extensive notes, as always, for each one of the articles. So this can be used in a few different ways. I mean, first, you could just go and get the course when it's out and use all of the extra stuff that I provide there. Second, if you just want to watch this video and then read the article on your own, sure, go for it. And then third, if you just want to watch this video, I guess my explanations here can kind of be a little bit of a standalone explanation. That's not preferable. You should be reading. Reading is very important. Don't just watch videos on YouTube. Please read. But if you can't, you can't. And this is as good a introduction as anything, I guess. So this question obviously is, and I kept saying read the article. I meant read the question. This is going to be question 3 of Prima Pars. If you want to get it, just go to aquinas.cc. You can get it online for free there. Or I guess you could use the New Advent version, although the New Advent version isn't as good, but it'll do. So first, we're going to begin with the Litany of St. Francis Borgia, and then a bit of a collect. O highest God, whom no one save thyself can perfectly know, have mercy on us. O incorporeal God, have mercy on us. Thou in whom is no composition of matter and form, have mercy on us. Thou who art thy existence and thy divinity, have mercy on us. Thou who art thy existence and thy essence, have mercy on us. Thou who art in no genus, have mercy on us. Thou in whom is no accident, have mercy on us. O God, wholly simple, have mercy on us. Thou who art commingled in composition with no others, have mercy on us. From those who say that God is the soul of the world, deliver us, O Lord. From those who say that God is the formal principle of all things, deliver us, O Lord. From David of Dinant, asserting that God is prime matter, deliver us, O Lord. From those who deny thy absolute simplicity by sophistic tricks, deliver us, O Lord. That contemplating divine simplicity, we may imitate it in simple hearts. We beseech thee to hear us. What God is like unto our God for greatness, thou who alone dost wonders. Oremus. O God, who art above all the composition and perfection of this world, possessing all formal perfections and sovereign simplicity, grant unto us in this life to gaze upon thy beauty by faith, to be inflamed for thee by charity, and to call upon thee by hope, that one day we may see thee face to face, without veil in the New Jerusalem, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so first, as a bit of an introduction to the article, so since this is the first question of this whole section of the Summa, I'm going to kind of give an overview of attributes in general. I have done my video introducing the physical, metaphysical essence of God and concept of attributes in general, but I didn't really outline the whole thing, the whole section of the Summa that is De Deo Uno. So we distinguish, following John of St. Thomas, between 3 types of attributes. So the first are going to be called entitative. So entitative attributes, think of entitative as according to being, uh, according to a sort of non-dynamic way. And that's weird because we're kind of defining it up and against operation. But that which is the principle of operation. Think of it more in that way, not having to do with operation. That'll kind of get you the sense there of what entitative is, what an attribute of being is. So it'd be like the difference between my rationality, which rationality in itself actually would be entitative, and then my intellection, which would actually be operative. Maybe that's not a good way of explaining it, but entitative, you just have to understand it as static rather than something which is ordered towards activity. So there's entitative, then there's what I call Gnostic. I know that's kind of like a weird term to use because some people kind of call it attributes of knowing, but attributes of knowing kind of sounds like it's talking about the actions of the intellect objectively, but it isn't. It's talking about the actions of a subjective intellect. So the foundations in God for being known and named by creatures. Those are what I would call the Gnostic attributes. And Gnostic just means it has some sort of relation to knowing, knowing on the part of the subject, that is on the part of us. But it is talking about something which is objectively based in God, although not objectively found in God as a thing, just as a ratio. So I again, that might have been a terrible explanation, but just know it's the knowing and naming of God. That's all you need to know. And the third category of attributes we have are the operative attributes. So the operative attributes are going to be talking about God's intellect and will, and then also the virtues of God's intellect and will, and then also the power of God, which is the principle in God for transitive action. So that's the threefold division. So in this course, we're going to just be covering the entitative, and then I'll have a separate one for the Gnostic, then a separate one for the operative, just so I can go into sufficient detail without feeling like I'm sort of trying to rush and skimp out. So that's going to be how it's divided. So since this one is specifically about the entitative, I'm going to be getting into the entitative. So the entitative, we're going to distinguish two types. The first type are going to be called the primary entitative attributes. And the second type, you guessed it, are going to be the secondary entitative attributes. So the primary entitative attributes, those are those attributes which follow upon directly God as pure act with the removal of all potency. So these five are going to directly remove one imperfection of being. So we're going to remove composition by calling God simple. We're going to remove imperfection by calling God perfect. We're going to remove limitation by calling God infinite. We're going to remove change by calling God immutable. We're going to remove division by calling God unified or one. So these primary entitative, they directly follow upon this this profound declaration of God as ipsum esse subsistence. That's what the primary entitative attributes are going to be. And the secondary entitative attributes, they're still going to be entitative, but they're going to follow upon one of those primary entitative attributes. So think of it like this. So we call God immutable, and that follows directly upon being because it's denying one the imperfection of change. So God is immutable. Now, what happens when, let's say, and St. Thomas actually orders things like this. Let's say we talk about God's immutability in relation to time. What would that be? Immutability in relation to time. That would be eternity. God is eternal. So eternity isn't something that directly follows upon being. No, it's something which follows through the mediation of immutability. So it's called a secondary entitative attribute. And then something similar happens with perfection and goodness. Something similar happens with infinity, and then ubiquity, which is omnipresence. That's the other term for it. And then so those are the difference between the primary and the secondary entitative attributes. So when it comes to that entitative attribute that removes composition, that is what we call simplicity. So all simple means is lack composition. And all composition means is that there is a whole with some parts in it. That's all it means. So I am a composite of body and soul. That's what I am. So there's two types of composition. Sorry, I need to take a drink real quick. So the first type of composition is what's called physical composition. Now, physical composition are going to be those that we're going to talk about in the first, 4 articles. So it's going to be the composition of matter and form. It's going to be the composition of quantitative parts. It's going to be the composition of nature and suppositum. It's going to be these compositions between physical parts. So the composition of these physical parts is called, you guessed it, physical composition. And the lack of composition of these physical parts is, you guessed it, physical simplicity. So, and then we have to understand also, as a brief note, that there are different levels of these compositions. So there are actually some things that are, besides God, simple. Angels, for example, are simple. But we have to remember, angels are composed of essence and existence. So in a certain sense, they're composite. Our souls, simple, but again, in another sense, composite. So we have to understand that there's various different levels within these, and there are various different types of simplicity, which St. Thomas is actually going to very helpfully go over in the process of the entirety of the question, because he's going to go over every single type of simplicity, and he's going to categorize it between physical simplicity and then the next one, which is going to be metaphysical simplicity. But when it comes to the distinction that results from physical composition, there's going to be a real distinction. So angels, for example, they have physical composition between their essence and their existence. So there's going to be a real distinction between their essence and existence. Us humans, we have a distinction between matter and form. So there's going to be a real distinction between our matter and form. So there's going, when it comes to this real distinction, this is all it means, is distinction between physical parts. And when it comes to this type of distinction, it is heretical to posit this type of distinction in God. This is anathematized by multiple different councils and popes, which we'll talk about later. But you cannot at all hold to this type of composition in God and really even still be a monotheist. You'd be a polytheist if you affirm some sort of real distinction, which is between physical parts. Now, on the second hand, we can have what are called metaphysical parts. So metaphysical parts, these are going to be a little bit more tricky to describe to you guys. They are technically the composition of integral ratione, so integral sort of formalities of reason, which doesn't help you guys at all in understanding the concept. But that's just the definition there. So when it comes to the sort of threefold types of distinction, which everybody always talks about. Actually, I'm not sure anybody talks about this besides me, but I always talk about this, and the authors always talk about this. So on the one hand, you have distinctions that are objective, and on the other hand, you have distinctions that are subjective. So objective distinctions are distinctions existing in the object before the consideration of the mind. And subjective distinctions are going to be distinctions that exist in the intellect. So objective distinctions are also known as real distinctions. But when it comes to subjective distinctions, they can be of two sorts. So on the one hand, you can have a subjective distinction that is merely conjured up by the mind. So you just kind of make it up. That's going to be what's called a nominal distinction. So this is going to be the distinction between, let's say, man and rational animal. That's just the distinction between the name and the real definition. So the difference between those two are merely nominal. There isn't any sort of real definition between man and rational animal. You just got more precise. On the other hand, you may have what's called a distinction of reason reasoned. The distinction is subjective. The distinction exists in the intellect, but there's some sort of foundation in the thing itself for making the distinction, although they aren't separate parts that can be distinguished before the consideration of the intellect. So an example of this, and this is going to be where we go off from the physical to the metaphysical distinction. So an example of this is going to be, let's say, the distinction between our rationality and our animality. So our rationality and our animality in myself, they are not objectively distinct. Before the consideration of my mind, there's no like rationality over there, animality over there that you can point to. Animality is my genus, and the specific difference is rationality. And rationality, in a certain sense, perfects the genus of animality. So there is not a real distinction because they're not sort of separate objects floating around in me. And on the other hand, they're not a merely nominal distinction. It's not just a difference between names. The concept of rationality and the concept of animality are completely different. So we would say rather that they are a virtual distinction because virtual, it comes from the word virtus. It means power, because there's some sort of, I guess you could say, potentiality in the thing. And we'll get into metaphysical potentiality a different time, but I'm using this in the broadest possible sense. There's some sort of power in the thing to where contact with your mind would cause you to make this distinction. There's some sort of foundation in the thing. It's kind of hard to describe. You just kind of feel it in your everyday life when you go around thinking about different types of distinctions. But it's kind of hard to kind of put your finger on how we talk about this. So why did I go through this whole explanation? Because when it comes to metaphysical parts are going to be one of those virtual distinctions. And I said one of them because we split actually between two types of virtual distinctions. So there's a type of virtual distinction that's okay to make in God. And on the other hand, there's a type of virtual distinction that's not okay to make in God. We don't merely make nominal distinctions between the attributes, between the perfections, between the person and essence, which is going to be talked about when we talk about the Trinity. We don't make merely nominal distinctions. That was actually a heretical view of Eckhart, which was condemned in the late medieval church. Thomists have never held to a merely nominal distinction. So when it comes to the virtual distinction, there is, on the one hand, what we call a major virtual distinction. And on the other hand, what we call a minor virtual distinction. So when it comes to a major virtual distinction is what's going to be called perfectly prescinded parts. And a minor virtual distinction are going to be called imperfectly prescinded parts. And I know that means nothing to you right now, but let me start to explain. So when it comes to things that are perfectly prescinded, that means there's no overlap between the concepts. So they're kind of perfectly separated, and even they have the relationship of perfectibility between one another. When you put them together, they kind of perfect into a whole. So when you look at me, for example, my rationality, my animality, if just by thinking of the concept of rationality, I don't necessarily think of the concept of animality, right? When I think of the concept of animality, I don't necessarily think of the concept of rationality. Correct? They are perfectly prescinded, so they're perfectly separated from one another as concepts, but not as an object, because they're in the same object. And they're related to one another as what are called metaphysical parts. So there's kind of two types of metaphysical parts. On the one hand, you can have a genus and species. So this would be like animality and rationality. And on the other hand, you can have the metaphysical parts of essence and properties. So that would be essence and then accidents which flow from the essence, which is going to be St. Thomas's question that he's talking about in Article 6. So genus is Article 5, genus and species. And Article 6 is going to be, sorry, I don't know why I lost my train of thought, is going to be essence and properties. And properties are going to be those things which flow from the essence. So all of those, they're going to have a major virtual distinction between one another. They're going to be perfectly prescinded from one another. But on the other hand, we have what's called the imperfectly prescinded. So when it comes to the imperfectly prescinded are going to be related to each other, not as kind of conceptual parts to a objective whole, but they're gonna have a little bit of overlap with one another, and that's what imperfectly prescinded basically means: is there's overlap of the concepts. So if you look into the single concept hard enough, you're going to come out with the other concept, but you kind of need to use your reasoning. You got to use your brain to draw it out, though. So when I think of, for example, ipsum esse long enough, when I think of being which is self-subsistent, when I think of essence that is equal to essence that is really identical to existence, when I think of that long enough, I'm going to come forth with all of the primary entitative attributes. And when I think of immutability long enough, I'm going to come out with the attribute of eternity. And when I think of, again, ipsum esse long enough, I'm going to come out with the operative nature of God, which is going to be the intellection. When I think of intellection long enough, I'm going to go to all of the other attributes, the operative attributes of God, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to all of the attributes of God, the certain attribute, you can draw forth all of the other attributes from it, because all of the other attributes are implicit in it. So, for example, this actually gets us into some questions surrounding, let's say, Islam. And natural theology. And I know I'm dropping the controversial stuff, but trust me, this is going to help pedagogically because you'll remember it. So do Muslims worship the Trinity when they direct their worship towards the one God of nature? Well, actually, yes. Since there's a minor virtual distinction between the attributes as explicit and implicit, when they direct themselves towards the singular unity of the essence of God, implicitly contained in that singular unity is going to be the relations, is going to be the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So even while they aren't explicitly directing their worship towards the triune God, they're going to be implicitly directing their worship towards the triune God. So that's kind of a real life application to this, what seems to be abstract theological question. So all of the attributes, they are related as minor virtual distinction. But there are some who are going to say that the attributes are related as a major virtual distinction, just like my rationality is related to my animality. But this is not the case. Now, this isn't heretical to hold this view. I want to make that clear. It isn't heretical, but it's said to be an error in theology. It is theologically certain that God does not have any metaphysical parts. Okay, so after that kind of complicated beginning, let us continue. So what is the sort of structure of how this Summa question is going to go? So there's a lot of different ways in which we can slice up and divide this question. So first, in the first 7 articles, St. Thomas is going to deny that there are intrinsic parts. So parts of sort of God himself, if you want to put it like that. And then when it comes to the second part, which is going to be in question 8, I named it extrinsic parts. Again, these are kind of pedagogical denotations. They're um, not really the best way of technically explaining it. But yeah, it's going to be whether God goes outside of himself and sort of grabs onto something to compose himself with. So it'd be like if, I don't know, we had a house and we painted the house blue. That would be some sort of exterior composition that's being brought in on the outside. So does God have this sort of these extrinsic parts? So think of the refutation of not polytheism, pantheism, the refutation of the idea that God is everything. This is what the eighth article is dealing with, where the first seven are kind of dealing with all of these intrinsic parts of a certain essence that we can think of. And it's important to note on that line of thought. When it actually, I'll get to it when I get to it. So when it comes to the first seven articles, they're divided into three parts. The first four are going to be physical parts. Remember, we talked about it's going to be the quantitative parts composed of matter and form. Then it's going to be composed of nature and suppositum, and then it's composed of essence and existence. And then we're going to have after that in articles of 5 and 6, they're going to be integral parts. So this is going to be a composition of species and genus in article 5, or what's called a generic predicate and then a specific difference. And then number 6, article 6, whether in God there are any accidents. St. Thomas is using accident here, not in the sense of like substance and accident like we would think of. He's using accident in the sense of a predicament. So it would be the relationship between something that is predicated essentially and something that is predicated accidentally. So it would be like the relationship between man as rational animal and then his risibility, which flows from man as rational animal. So accident in that sense. So you don't get confused why it seems like he's asking about composition of substance and accident in 5, then also in 8. Well, he's not talking about composition of substance and accident in 5 in the sense that you're thinking of composition of substance and accident. And then in 7, he kind of ends on a high note of just saying no parts at all in general, and then he moves on from there. But we can also look at it in a few different ways. Because he does bring out a few of his classic methodological, how do I put it, methodological techniques in this article. It's really cool to look at. So we have the idea of a terminus of ascent and principle of descent. So in Article 4, St. Thomas reaches the judgment that in God, essence and existence are the same. So at this point in question 3, article 4, he's going to draw everything else in the entirety of De Deo Uno from this point. Article 4 is actually probably the most important article in, I wouldn't say in the whole Summa, but definitely in De Deo Uno. It is extraordinarily important. And you see this by all of the places throughout his corpus that he writes about this. He writes about it a lot. And I, as a note, I do list all of the places where he talks about it in the rest of his corpus in my course notes. So if you get the course, you can get those. But yeah, this is going to be the most important. He's going to be able to, from this judgment that God's essence and existence are the same, he's going to be able to draw forth everything else and be able to judge all of this. So it's kind of the mountaintop of De Deo Uno right here. You're climbing up the mountain all the way up here to the judgment that essence and existence are the same in God, and you're kind of sledding down the rest of the way. You're looking down over the rest of the landscape of De Deo Uno and judging everything else on this principle that essence and existence are the same in God. It's really hugely important that you very much focus on Article 4. So that's that, and then you also have. It's really cool to see St. Thomas going through a process of what's called induction, or you can also call it analysis if you want, where he's going and looking through all of the particulars of the different ways in which something could be composed. And then he eliminates all the particulars and then makes what's called the universal synthetical judgment, where he takes all of the particulars, kind of rises up to the judgment that is universal, kind of the way in which you would look through, let's say, I don't know, you meet a friend and they have 5 siblings, and then you meet all their siblings, and all their siblings are boys. And you make the universal synthetic judgment from that induction of all of their siblings that your friend has only brothers. That's the universal synthetic judgment right there. So St. Thomas, I guess, technically could have just had like Article 7 in this whole, I guess Article 7 and 8, just covering intrinsic and extrinsic simplicity, and just done away with it. But he had a lot of other things going on here with wanting to sort of draw forth every single instance of composition and to negate it. So this is seen in St. Thomas's own summary, actually, of what he had done in the first 6 articles of this question. He says, and this is in the Respondeo of Article 7, for there is neither composition, and then he's going to list the physical parts, of quantitative parts in God, since he is not a body, nor composition of matter and form, nor does his nature differ from his suppositum, nor his essence from his existence, neither, and then he's going to list the metaphysical parts, is there in him composition of genus and difference, nor of subject and accident. Therefore, it is clear that God is nowise composite, but altogether simple. So now getting into a bit of the magisterial teaching on this. There's a few of them. The first is going to be in the Council of Reims. So this was in the 12th century, I believe, off the top of my head. So it's going to say, we believe and confess that God is the simple nature of divinity, and that it cannot be denied in any Catholic sense that God is divinity and divinity is God. Moreover, it is said that God is wise by wisdom, great by magnitude, eternal by eternity, one by oneness, God by divinity, and other such things. We believe that he is wise only by that wisdom which is God himself, that he is great only by that magnitude which is God himself, that he is eternal only by that eternality which is God himself, that he is one only by that oneness which is God himself, that he is God only by that divinity which he is himself. That is, that he is wise, great, eternal, one God of himself. So all this is saying really is that there's a sort of union of the abstract and the concrete in God. So throughout, let's say you look at 5 different men, you would say that let's say 3 of them are wise. They have in them some sort of participated form of wisdom, but they aren't wisdom itself. They have a composition of perfection and imperfection in them. You look at all of the beautiful things around you, and they're changeable and less than pure beauty itself. But God is beauty himself, life himself, wisdom himself. He is his own wisdom, life, and beauty. He is, and this kind of actually makes it a bit weird to even speak about God in terms of attributes, because we say we can't really say with a complete accuracy. We need to make sure we're careful of our negations of imperfections in our language. We can't say with complete accuracy that God is living, because living supposes that it is some sort of imperfect participation of life. On the other hand, it's hard to say that God is life, because life is something which is abstract and not subsisting. So we kind of have to go back and forth between all of these terms which we use by God. But the Council of Reims right here is explicitly explaining how we bring together the abstract and the concrete in God. And that's really what simplicity is doing. Simplicity is saying that God is his perfections. God doesn't have his perfections in a participated way. There's a sort of complete union of the abstract and the composite in God. So next, the Fourth Lateran Council Firmly we believe and we confess simply that the true God is one alone, eternal, immense, unchangeable, incomprehensible, omnipotent, ineffable, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Indeed, three persons, but one essence, substance, or nature, entirely simple. Next is going to be Paul the Fourth. Since the depravity and iniquity of certain men have reached such a point in our time that, of those who wander and deviate from the Catholic faith, all and each who have hitherto asserted, claimed, or believed that Almighty God was not three in persons, and of an entirely uncomposed and undivided unity of substance, in one single simple essence of divinity. And then next to Vatican I, this is going to be just the sort of final statement when it comes to the doctrine of God. It's really good. The Holy Catholic Apostolic Roman Church believes and confesses that there is one true living God, creator and Lord of heaven and earth, omnipotent, eternal, immense, incomprehensible, infinite in intellect and will, and in every perfection, although he is one singular, altogether simple and unchangeable spiritual substance. So next, this is on the flip side. So right now we kind of are running with simplicity right here. We've denied all of our fun real distinctions, and the common teaching of the theologian even denies those major virtual distinctions. But the Magisterium also denies, interestingly enough, that the distinction is merely nominal. It does reject that. So these two propositions are condemned by Eckhart. From Eckhart, these two propositions, which are by Eckhart, are condemned. So the first is, God is one in all ways and according to every reason, so that in himself he cannot find any multitude in intellect or outside intellect. For he who sees two or sees a distinction does not see God. For God is one beyond the above number. Neither is he counted one with anyone. It follows, therefore, that no distinction can exist or to be understood in God himself. That is condemned. There are distinctions in God, just not real distinctions, as explained previously. And further, every distinction is foreign to God, either in nature and in person. It is proved that nature itself is one in this oneness, and any person is one in the oneness which is nature. Both of those condemned. Can't hold them. Eckhart is bad. Okay, continuing. So this is sort of the simple argument that all of the other arguments are kind of going to run off of. This flows from the 5 ways. So it's going to be that compounds are caused, for diverse things are not according to themselves united. Therefore, God is simple. So something which is a compound must be unified by something with that perfection that has it not in a compound way, but in a way that is primordial. So that's going to be the sort of simple argument that all of the rest of the arguments are going to be drawn from for divine simplicity and against divine composition. And then when it comes to the sort of applications devotionally and contemplatively for this doctrine, there's going to be 2 of them. So the first one is going to be the self-sufficiency of God in the poverty of creatures. So in our day-to-day lives, when we look around ourselves and we look at the various perfections that are present in creatures, we may look around ourselves and see, let's say, a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful bird, or you may go home and see your beautiful wife, or you may see a beautiful painting, or you may hear a beautiful song. What you see in all of these things are beauties which are, in one way or another, limited and imperfect. And even then, the entirety of their entity is not beautiful. It's something which is participating in a limited degree. Beauty is not overtaken every single aspect of what they are, in that they become beauty itself. So when we look at that and similar perfections to everything around us, we see that they are imperfect composites which are walking around limited and receiving it from another in a sort of participated form. But we know that upon the contemplation of those things and the assent that is present in the 4th way, yes, the 4th way is really that sort of foundation stone for simplicity. When we raise our minds up from all of these composite and imperfect and participated and limited things in the world, we know and see by faith that there is going to be this there is going to be this unified, simple, perfect being, to which all of the perfections are going to be present in sovereign simplicity in their eminent and formal modes. That's going to be that contemplation that we can have, is going to be to look at the poverty of creatures and the complete self-sufficiency of God in all of the possession of all perfections in an even more eminent manner. And not only is he going to have those perfections, no, more than that, he is going to be those perfections. God is a simple form. God is he both negates the imperfections of that which is concrete, and he negates the imperfections of that which is abstract. That is, that he is both subsisting, and he has the perfection in its entirety. So on the other hand, we can also look at the negation which is necessary in our conception of God. That any sort of corporeal images of God as corporeal images. So this is not saying that we can't have certain corporeal images that we know are metaphorical and teaching something by way of a certain metaphorical proportionality. We're not saying that. But we are saying is that when it comes to our conception of God, it ought to be purified from all of those imperfections of our created concepts. And it ought to raise as close as we can to that sovereign and perfect simplicity of the divinity. Okay, that's all I have. Bro, turn on the webcam. That's way easier to follow. Sorry, man. No webcam today, and I just saw this. I would have turned it on if I would have seen it. Oh, wait, no, you sent it right now. Never mind. You were too late. You were way too late. Okay, this is all that I have. Thank you. Hope you all enjoyed this, and God bless.